Hi everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullish Show. Today I have with me Jeff Amerine, and he spells his name the right way, as in all Jeff should be, with a J. So Jeff is nationally recognized for the creation of lasting venture ecosystems and co-authored in 2021 the Amazon best-selling book, Creating Startup Junkies, Building Sustainable Venture Ecosystems in Unexpected Places. Jeff has held senior leadership positions in 9 startups and multiple Fortune 500 companies, including American Freightways and FedEx Freight. Has made more than 90 plus venture investments, and I'm curious about those and where he sees the best place to invest. By the way, this is not investment advice. Jeff now holds Startup Junkie Consulting and co-leads Innovation Junkie and Cadron Capital Partners. Jeff served as Associate Vice Provost, Research and Economic Development, and Director of Technology Ventures at the University of Arkansas until leaving to pursue Startup Junkie Consulting full-time in 2015. Jeff still serves as Adjunct Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Sam M. Walton College of Business at University of Arkansas. Jeff graduated from United States Naval Academy in 1984, served as an Air Force officer for 6 years, and holds a Master of Science in Operations Management at the University of Arkansas. Jeff, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
I almost actually mispronounced my own name. That was really embarrassing, but that's okay. So, Jeff, I'm curious about, you started your career essentially in the military, and so I'm curious about that. What led you to join the military, and how old were you when you did that?
Yeah, well, ripe old age of 17 when I showed up at Annapolis to be at the Naval Academy. And the impetus for that is I'd grown up in a military family. My dad was a veteran of 3 wars, World War II, Korea and Vietnam. He was a multi-engine pilot in the Air Force for a bunch of years. And so for me, in many ways, the family business was the military. I served, both my older brothers served, both my brother-in-laws, my sister. We were all connected to it. And we didn't know it at the time, but back to before the Revolutionary War in the U.S., there had always been someone in each generation that had served. Wow. So that's kind of what I grew up with. It's all I knew. You know, I was very immersed in watching all the space program and thought that aviation and the services was the way to go. And so I was kind of programmed for that. Definitely a lot different than where I ended up in entrepreneurship ultimately.
Yeah. So did you grow up on military bases? Was that part of your life?
I did. So the first 6 years of primary school, I was in 6 different elementary schools, 6 different locations. I went to 2 junior high schools and then 1 high school ultimately. But during that time frame, we lived in a bunch of different states in the U.S. I lived for 2 years in the Philippines during the Vietnam War as well. So I got to see some of that stuff on kind of a firsthand basis. But it was the one thing about that, being a military dependent, is it tends to build an element of resiliency. You're never anywhere more than a year and a half, or 2 years. And so you have to make friends quickly. You have to be able to deal with chaos and ambiguity and just sort of uncomfortable situations. And I think that might be a good breeding ground for entrepreneurial spirit, because there's a lot of that in entrepreneurship for sure.
Yeah, and I think some of the military background brings a certain discipline into focus. I was certainly I was a sales manager for a while, and I remember, we hired an ex-military guy, and he sort of brought that sort of approach, which is, highly disciplined, which is really great for making cold sales calls.
Yeah, you don't mind the grind, and former military folks know how to show up on time, and there tend to be a high bias towards preparation and whatnot. But I would also say, with the discipline also comes this concept that's frequent in the military. If I don't have direction to the contrary, I'm going to go do something. Particularly in the Western militaries more than others, I think that authorization to take the initiative within the rules of engagement is ever present, and that is also, I think, maybe a good element for entrepreneurship. You have a bias towards taking action versus waiting for somebody to tell you what to do.
Yeah, because if you don't take action, nothing happens. Frankly.
Exactly. Exactly right.
So you're in the military. Many things like, what was some of those? Is there anything interesting or stands out for you in that time you were in the military that you could share? Because obviously the military taught you things, but what are some memories, great memories that you had along the way?
Yeah, one of the big things, and I think you'd hear this from a lot of former military people that have had long careers in the civilian world, is you take for granted when you're in that esprit de corps, a team cohesion, the fact
Yes.
that shared purpose, particularly in operational units. And when you get out and you get into the corporate world in particular, it's very difficult to recreate that. I mean, the best high performing businesses tend to create that, but in the military, for sure, when you're in an operational unit, there's the shared pain and struggle, the shared commitment to mission, and that's hugely important and something that you can rally around that's not always present in the corporate world. So in the startup world, I think one of the key things is to try to build that sort of culture where there is strong team cohesion and commitment to a common goal. And those are some things that I picked up in the military. There's also some good life lessons. There was a young guy, probably 5 or 6 years older than me, that was an instructor in some of my initial training. And he said the secret to leadership, his name was Tom Cullen. The secret to leadership is when things go well, pass along all the credit. And when things go poorly, take all the blame. Now, other people have said that, John Maxwell and whatnot. That's not necessarily a great formula for getting promoted in some corporate settings, but it's a great formula for building a team that's going to follow you anywhere because they know you've got their back and you're going to do right by them. So those are some of the key things I think that I picked up along the way.
Yeah. I think certainly in having my own team and being a sales manager and CEO of a couple of different businesses, is that, yeah, taking ownership. And I think, and also getting out of the way, you hire people to do a job and to trust them to do it and let your ego get out of the way and let them do it.
Exactly.
And people will constantly surprise you generally for the good. And that's what I really love. And yeah, praise them constantly. I think the other thing too is like job well done and be grateful. And I think that's the other thing that I've certainly learned. Now, so you're in the military. What was the inspiration and the call to actually do what you're doing today? Where did that come from?
Yeah. And again, with the context being, I didn't come from an entrepreneurial family. I mean, my parents were both sort of Depression era people from rural areas that where World War II and all the military brought kind of lifted them up in many respects. And so I didn't have it on the brain that at some point I was going to go out and start businesses. But I was taking some graduate work while I was still in the military, and I took a new ventures course. It was part of the MBA program that I was pursuing at the time. And as I went through that, I realized this is the kind of thing that scratches an itch, something that I've been looking for that I haven't found in other large organizations, and kind of built a project, built a plan for a new business. And I got excited by that. I mean, it was something that was touching something in me that I hadn't really realized was there. And so consequently, completed that program, got out of the military, went to a large corporation, Westinghouse Electric, was building satellite and defense electronics, both for commercial and Department of Defense. And along the way, I had this kind of nagging feeling that I wasn't ever going to be a large organization guy for a career. And I harkened back to that class and I thought I can go do this. Now I was wrong. At the ripe old age of early 30s, I was ill prepared to actually go out and start anything. And if you roll the clock back 30 years, there weren't mentoring groups. There wasn't really angel funds. There weren't entrepreneurial support organizations. You were on your own. And most people thought you were crazy for leaving a company with a good job to go start something. But that's what I did because I knew that was something that I needed to pursue. I was compelled. I was called to try to go start businesses. And I did that a bunch of different times, primarily in technology and telecom and the early days of voice over IP and a variety of things like that, software related stuff. What led me to doing what I'm doing today was the fact that that was a really hard journey. I mean, it was taxing, grueling, financially difficult at times, financially rewarding at times. And so Startup Junkie is this sort of manifestation of McKinsey quality consulting plus event management company that offers those really important services to startups and entrepreneurs that they couldn't afford to pay for if they had to pay for them. And we've got a structure where we're third-party funded by groups like the Walton Family Foundation, the U.S. Small Business Administration, U.S. Department of Commerce, Arkansas Economic Development Commission. And we can provide those services to these companies at no cost to them in a way that we can help them get through that 1 year and then 5 year survival rate. And if you do that, all the studies show that there's good economic outcomes in terms of additional employment and new products created, et cetera. And so it's this weird business model that allowed us to provide the kind of services that I wish I had had when I was running startups that I didn't have, in a way that hopefully will help propel some of these aspiring entrepreneurs on to realize their own dreams.
Yeah, and that's true for me. And I started my first business. I was in my early 30s, and I was quite a good salesman, but salesman doesn't prepare you for managing cash flow and all those and capital. Like, I just grew a business. I grew it so fast that I needed a lot more working capital. In other words, yeah, and that was a painful lesson, that one. I grew a business to 2 million turnover in 2 years, and had a team of 30 doing installation of structured cabling systems. So again, so telecommunications area is deregulated in the early 1990s in Australia. So that was a painful lesson. So that's why you need someone to guide you, don't you, like you guys do?
Exactly. Ask the questions that you don't know to ask. In some ways, that ignorance, that sort of that childlike mind you bring to it is a good thing, because you don't realize, hey, what I'm about to undertake is going to really be difficult and painful. You might not do it if you knew all the answers, but if you can turn to a group that they've got the scars and they've walked the road that you're trying to walk down, they can help you in so many ways. Not by saying don't do this or don't do that, but just by asking the questions you don't know to ask. You know, that's we do the Socratic method a lot, whereas we don't give the answer, but we ask hopefully all the right questions and make them think, yeah, I really ought to be thinking about that, or I didn't consider that, et cetera, that type of thing.
Yeah. I think some comes down to the counseling method, really, the Socratic method, isn't it? So let you find your own answers, but because then you'll own them. So it's really, really important. So what was maybe some of your biggest wins? So what was the first business you started?
Yeah. Well, so there's the first one I started, and there's the first one I would admit to, right? So the first one I started was a sort of an offshoot of this MBA project that I had done when I was still in the military. And it was a total side hustle business that I did with my wife. And we thought it'd be a great idea to have a business that did costume balloon deliveries, where we lived in sort of metropolitan Washington, Baltimore, and Annapolis area. And so the idea is, got a Bart Simpson outfit, you got a Ninja Turtles outfit, and you deliver balloons and candy or whatever. You go to kids' parties. It was a side hustle type of thing that we thought, gee, this will be a lot of fun, and it's something my wife can do, and I can manage all the back office stuff. Well, it turned out it was a labor-intensive business with a lot of angry customers, if the character wasn't as entertaining as they should have been. And so we learned a lot about what not to do in business. I think from that first one, and it had kind of a goofy name. It was called Phony Balloonies. In other words, you phone up and you get balloon, phony balloony. That was the name. Terrible marketing. I didn't know anything about marketing at that time, but we ran that and we learned some things about, listen, we're going to be better off doing businesses where there's kind of higher order thinking and expertise required, where there's more leverage in it than what you can get just by virtue of growing a force of people to actually do deliveries for you. Yeah. Didn't enjoy that too much, and had some really kind of scary stories based on some of the deliveries that we both got to do in places that we probably wouldn't ever go back to. But anyhow, I mean, so that was the first, and the first real business I ran was a consultancy. It was it's called FCT Consulting. We lived near a place called Fort Creek, so it was Fort Creek Consulting, FCT Consulting, and I was doing exactly what I was doing when I was at Westinghouse for business development, advice and guidance, sales support, marketing support for technology businesses. And then from that, we ran across some really interesting technology that would allow for call reversal. And you may be familiar with this. There was a time when direct dialing from one international location to another was prohibitively expensive because of the tariffs and monopoly telcos. And so there was this call reversal system that came in vogue in the late 80s and early 90s that would allow you to call into a switch, a telecom switch that was in the US, and then you'd hang up and it would capture that call information. It would place an outbound call to you and allow you to do a bridge call somewhere else. And those two US originated legs were cheaper than calling direct. It was total arbitrage. deal.
Right.
We built a business doing that for a number of years, and I learned some of the vagaries of the hustle associated with reselling minutes and having large carriers as your partners. And, we caught a little bit of the Asian flu through that. One of our partners was a big player out of South Korea, and they decided to go bankrupt in the middle of our deal. And so it was the business where I really learned all the things I would never do again in terms of spending money on things that didn't matter, hiring the wrong people, having expenses out in front of revenues. But that was one that set. I call that one FCT Telecom, and we call that FCT University, because a whole bunch of us that grew up in that went off to do many more things that were pretty consequential along the way. But I like talking sometimes about the things that didn't go well, like FCT Telecom, as much as the things that did, because you learn a lot from those failures and those things that didn't go right. The stuff that did go well, there were several of them where we built telecom related things and had exits. We had license rights and international location in the Dominican Republic. We sold the rights to that. It was based on speculation. There was a land grab as telecom deregulation began to occur. I helped set the foundation for a company that ultimately went public. And I was there in the early days and took an early exit. Did another software company that was aimed at motor freight, automating some of the things associated with delivering products and services for motor freight carriers and tracking hours of service. And that software ended up getting sold off to a hardware provider out of New Zealand, actually. So I had several of those kind of experiences along the way.
Right. So you've been doing this for what, 30 years now, is that correct?
Long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think we're of a similar vintage, like just over 30 now, aren't we? So, so you've seen, I suppose, business change, and so have I. And we've moved much more from, bricks and mortar type businesses to where you have a lot of digital startups and so on. So, and you played in the telecommunication industry, obviously, and that because the telecommunication industry was big monopolies that got broken up. I think AT&T got broken up into the baby bells, didn't it? So, so what are you seeing today in terms of startups? Where is the interest and passion lie for the people that come through your doors? I'd be interested by what you're seeing, and based on, in the last, let's say 10 years, I've got social media came out and started to really hit its straps in about 2008,
Sure.
9. So what have you seen in the last decade? You think, I'd be curious about your observation of what people are wanting to do as side hustles or startups.
Yeah, and we see probably a couple thousand ventures a year total between the stuff we look to invest in and the companies we help. We see everything from conventional businesses that you can imagine, like new restaurant concepts, food trucks. We see food and beverage and consumer packaged goods deals. The stuff that I think is most interesting to me is the ones where they solve a really interesting problem and they can do it in an incredibly capital efficient way. So I'll give you an example. I had the good fortune of being an early investor in a fund that picks off the best of the best Y Combinator companies. And Y Combinator is kind of the penultimate startup fulcrum here in the US, highly selective. And one of the companies that was in the batch that we invested in was called Truebill. And Truebill was this very simple concept of they would get you out of subscriptions you didn't know you were still in a very seamless kind of automated way. Mm-hmm. And so that was one where Rocket Finance ended up acquiring them for, I think it was $1.7 billion a couple of years ago. And we got in early at a $12 million valuation. So the reason why I bring that up is not to say, gee, it was a huge hit, which it was, but to say they solved an understandable problem. It was easy to explain, and it was ultimately a must-have. People had all these subscriptions to things that they really didn't need anymore, and they had no idea they were even paying for them. Mm-hmm. And so with that as a model, recently our fund, Cadron Capital, invested in another one that's very similar called Privacy Hawk. And Privacy Hawk is a business that you could find, it's West Coast based, that does the very same thing with your private information. It goes out and kind of scrubs the web and finds all the places where your private information is still held and cleans it out of there. And the thing I love about that business is they've like 10x their revenue profitably year over year in the last 3 years.
Wow.
And so last year they did 2 million. This year they're on track to do 20. And when you think about capital efficiency, and this is an overall statement about what technology can do, we asked the founder, we said, listen, to go from 2 to 20, how much headcount are you going to have to add? And he said 5. They're going from 10 people to 15 people to go from 2 million to 20 million in revenue. Now, that's probably kind of an outlier case. But the thing that I think is interesting to see within the world of artificial intelligence is the amount of leverage that you can get from automated systems, to where it's not all a function of adding additional people in order to be able to get the growth. And what we look for in the investments that we are most interested in are those that are really capitally efficient. And they're not just burning up money on kind of buying market, they're doing profitable growth along the way. So they've got all kinds of optionality after a particular capital raise they're in. They don't necessarily have to raise because they're going to be profitable.
Yeah.
And so I've seen a trend in 23 and 24 back to fundamental economics that say sales growth is awesome. Profitable sales growth will keep you in the game. And that we're starting to see a lot more of that, quite honestly.
Yeah. And it's just, it blows you away sometimes to see the valuations and people paying for something that are huge loss-making ventures and don't look like they're actually going to make much money. Like, I don't like talking about Trump or politics, but Truth Social, the new Trump publicly shell company that they launched, doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, the valuations, it's a head scratcher. And some of these things, the markets value things in ways that it's a herd mentality. And we've seen what that herd mentality can do. They drive up valuations, and eventually it's kind of like musical chairs. Somebody says, well, this doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. And then everybody sits down and the air comes out of the bubble. We're seeing some of that. AI is in a sort of next growth path. The difference, I would say, with artificial intelligence right now versus 3, 4, and 5 years ago when we were all looking at it is it's been democratized in a way that guys like us can access it and can do productive things with it. Whereas before, it's like, yeah, AI and machine learning, they're great, but drag in the data scientists, because otherwise you're not going to be able to make use of it. So that democratization is one of the trends that we're finding is beginning to have kind of consequential impact in a lot of different verticals. So we're looking really closely at that kind of stuff where they've got a good business case, not AI for the sake of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. The interesting thing about, there's fads and there's trends. So, and I started, a media company, a blog, which I did in 2009 because I saw the rise of social media. I said, there's something going on here. So I said, we'll just write about it. So that passion project became a full-time business. And it was really a side hustle I did while I was, working at a digital agency, helping sell websites. So, and today I was in Lake Como. I got this link from a friend of mine who was talking about, the rise of how you could use artificial intelligence to do copywriting. And I've been to Ray Edwards. He's from the USA, and I've been to his workshops and masterminds before. And he talked about this new ChatGPT thing that I'd sort of heard of. And ChatGPT, what I love about it, and it's actually similar to what's happened with the web browser. ChatGPT gave a user-friendly interface to AI that hadn't been publicly released before.
Definitely.
Yeah. And the internet was given a friendly face through the web browser, right? So the web basically was opened up because it was given a simple interface to use for everyone. And that's what happened with ChatGPT. And now we're just seeing an explosion of this, and it is changing the world as we speak, but at a velocity I've never seen before in technology.
Yeah, I mean, they talk a lot about Moore's law, that idea of computing power doubling every 18 months. I think we're totally off that curve. And to the extent that there's fear around ultimately where AI ends up and how much autonomous activity there really is, and what that means for humankind. Now, I'm not as worried about it as a lot of people. I think those sorts of things can be sorted out. But what I do think about is when you've got, particularly in the Western world, declining birth rates and a shortage of skilled talent, we have to have these kinds of productivity tools that are going to allow us to do more with less, just because we can't line up the people to be able to do all the work, the higher order work that's required. And I think anytime you can put people in the mode of being an editor or an analyzer, or somebody that's able to critique work rather than doing that research and that authorship directly, good things will happen. I think ultimately good things will happen from this, and productivity will go up.
Oh, absolutely. So what is then coming across your desk in terms of AI startups and ideas? Is that bubbling along, or is it?
It is. It is. When there's some, it's kind of, you and I are, like you said, are a similar vintage. And I can remember when the most conventional businesses in the world would attach .com to the end of their name, and magically they were this sort of omni-channel .com thing. And they weren't at all, but they would attach it just because there was panache associated with it. There's still some of that where people are like, oh, it's an AI play, and and it isn't really. But the best AI companies have really gone deep on specific use cases. So a good example would be one called OmniKey, which is based in San Francisco, that we invested in. And it's essentially a marketing content generator in a can. I mean, you could say, well, this is going to be the ultimate disintermediation of large agencies like Mars and Saatchi and all those other big players. But in fact, whereas it enables brand managers and other marketers within large companies to kind of do a bunch of that content generation they would otherwise have to pay graphic designers and copywriters to do, it also is a force multiplier for the agencies because they can do more with fewer people. So OmniKey is a really interesting one. And the thing that I love about it is all that time-consuming work with coming up with content or logos or images or videos, it's all kind of there. And then you can get into the mode of what do we like? What do we critique? Where do we add the human element into it? That's one we've seen that we invested in that we really like and we think does some really interesting things.
Yeah. So what's your, so you're doing the consulting and helping people. So what is the other, so obviously you're investing as well. Is that personally, or is that a group, or is it your capital?
Some of both. So there's occasionally, if something doesn't fit the investment thesis of Cadron Capital Partners, which is our sort of conventional venture capital fund that we have, I will invest personally. If there's stuff where it's either too early or doesn't quite fit the investment thesis, or it's in a sector. So occasionally I'll make an investment in something that's interesting to me that isn't a fit. So a good example would be there's a penetration testing as a service cybersecurity company that was in our accelerator that was raising around. They were a little bit early in terms of where they were in revenue growth for what our fund would look at. And I invested personally because I liked the founders. They had some interesting deals in place with GoDaddy and other large players. You could see it scaling and you could see the potential. And like it or not, fear-based sales, cybersecurity, and the overall geopolitical threat is not decreasing. I mean, it's a more dangerous world now, maybe in many respects, than it has been even during the Cold War. And so that was a business that I got involved with directly. As it relates to Cadron, we tend to look for businesses in general that we understand, where we can add value based on the enterprise connections we have, and where there are already a couple $1 million in ARR or $4 million in annual revenues. They got a lot of traction. We'll tend to invest as a follower, kind of a strategic follower. We'll write smaller checks than what would typically be expected for a company that looks at a little bit later stage stuff. But we get invited in a lot of times because we have access to really interesting enterprises that most people want to sell to ultimately.
Yeah. So the whole venture capital area was on a real tear, wasn't it, 2 or 3 years ago, until interest rates started going up. And it was easy to get money. It was cheap. Now, what he observed is, so basically the whole investment industry in America and around the world, literally, didn't grind to a halt, but it's actually slowed down because, like, I think it was investment funds available like half of what it used to be. What are you seeing today with interest rates they've been topped? What are you observing today with venture capital and investing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In fact, we were at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I had to give we were there with the Korean contingent. I had to kind of give an outlook on venture capital. And we did a little bit of research with PitchBook and with National Venture Capital Association and others. And the thing that was really interesting is 22 and 23, and I would say early part of 24, the funds were having really difficult time raising capital from institutional players, from public institutions, from corporations. And part of the reason why was you have no risk assets that were essentially paying 7, 8, 9% interest. So they look at that kind of return based on the interest rates being elevated versus we're going to put money into this risky stuff, this asset class that's going to have some zeros that is much more speculative. And so you saw kind of a natural flow of some of that big time limited partner money into a less risky asset class. And so we had a hell of a time, quite honestly, with Cadron Fund 2, getting that fund raised. Now, we ultimately did, but we didn't raise as much and we didn't raise it as quickly as what we thought. Now, that trickled down to ventures at every stage, because the later stage ventures were like, oh my God, our growth equity partners are saying get to profitability ASAP, even though they've been driving top line growth. And so a bunch of them had to take whatever capital they could take, cut staff, cut heads, right size the business, maybe something they should have done all the way along, yes. Bottom line focus. And I think that was healthy in a way, but it was also really daunting. You have to look at your portfolio and say, gee, we got to keep some dry powder to be able to keep these things alive as we get through this period. It seems like it's settled out a little bit. There's still plenty of capital available. I think the valuations are looking a lot more reasonable from an investment standpoint. But as those interest rates stay high, it's going to continue to have a little bit of a slowing effect in general on the raising of new funds and on the, particularly pre-seed and seed investments. A lot of that capital is going to later stage stuff.
Yeah, because basically some sanity's come back to the marketplace. Really.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Let's invest in a company that actually is making money.
Exactly.
That's showing
Shocking,
growth.
Right? Shocking. That would make sense.
Yeah, let's invest in a company that makes money rather than just buying into the dream and the myth. So, but sometimes people see opportunities that do tend up, but that quite often it doesn't work out. Like companies are raised, $1 billion. They rent the most expensive offices and they burn through cash at a rate which makes your eyes water.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. A plan for capital incineration is something we avoid. We really, I mean, it seems stupid and obvious, but looking at founders that are frugal and that they don't spend money on stuff they really don't need is one of the key things that we look for. We're not interested in paying for rent in really nice offices or cars or trips or a lot of other BS. They better be focused on building product and sales and then delivering on that and not a lot else.
Yeah. There's one area that I've certainly being involved in the digital type businesses and software and so on and media. A lot of companies are moving towards a subscription model, like even in retail. But so I'd be interested in your opinion on what you think of subscription models per se, in that typically they tend to have higher valuations, don't they, for one?
Right.
They're much more predictable.
Right.
Because anything that's sort of like project sales based means it's going to be lumpy, whereas subscription can be, as long as you keep the churn down, can be much more predictable and also have higher valuations. I'm interested in your view, because you must see quite a few subscription business models come across your desk.
We do. And I grew up in kind of the client license model, where it was a bunch of CapEx, they whether it was software or hardware or both, bunch of CapEx on the front end. And then if the only long tail in the business was maybe maintenance or warranty support, that type of stuff, really lumpy episodic sales, long sales cycles, et cetera. The whole theory behind SaaS and subscription based is you can get somebody on board out of their OpEx, and they're going to be more likely at a lower level to take a chance on that versus a huge capital outlay. And I'll tell you, those businesses that haven't fully moved that direction, where there's still a big ticket on the front end, they have a devil of a time. And they don't have the benefit of somebody that's going to get in there where it's $100 to, $1,000 a month. If it's 150,000 or 250,000 or $1 million up front, the
Hmm.
sales cycles are somewhere between 6 months and infinity. And that's very hard, difficult,
Hmm.
very difficult business to forecast. So yeah, we have a strong preference towards those. There are cases where you'll see services-oriented businesses that are enabled by technology, where they get in based on trust and subject matter expertise. They can have very long contract cycles. Those are fine too, but the valuations, they get a little more punished in the market. Rather than a 6 to 10 times multiple on revenues, they might get a 1 to 2 times at best. And so
Hmm.
we tend to look for those things that have a lot of technical leverage. And
Yeah.
that typically implies subscription.
Yeah, I've been involved with a company that moved to I've been basically was on the board for a while and also an investor, and they did creative as a service. So in other words, and what worried me a little bit about that was, will AI basically produce competitors into the marketplace that are purely AI driven, and instead of a hybrid? But I think at the end of the day, I think business models are still going to be a hybrid of really smart people and leverage technology.
Yep.
And it's trying to find the sweet spot in that. So, and the other thing that I'm intrigued by is watching AI is, are the big players just going to dominate because of the cost of training the big, large language models, or are we going to see a lot of smaller players come into the scene? So, for example, like there's companies that are trying to compete with Canva, for example, which is an Australian company that basically took on Adobe,
Right.
uh, and now it's valued about, I think, 40, 50 billion. Um, Melanie Perkins, I worked with her in the past. They're producing sort of services within their platform that a lot of AI startups are trying to do just on their own. So I'd
Right.
be interested in
Right.
your thoughts on the mix of, in the future, as we watch AI unfold in front of us at incredible velocity, the mix between what we call the bigger players taking advantage because they've got the capital and got market share, versus the small startups that are going to go, hand-to-hand combat to win market share.
Yeah. I mean, and it's kind of the classic age-old question: the better capitalized larger players versus the scrappy working out of their garage small shops that just have a few people. There will be an ongoing advantage to agile teams that can do stuff quickly without a lot of governance, without a lot of the typical overhead that you get in a larger corporation. I still think that that's going to exist, and in a healthy way. And in fact, I think a lot of the smaller companies can use the tools that larger companies and others have developed against the larger players, and they can just move more quickly because they have fewer people. The decision-making process is quicker. I don't think there'll ever be a loss of agility. Now, that said, startups, by definition, you hear Peter Thiel say this, they've got to be 10 times better than an incumbent. They've got to really be
Mm.
differentiated. Or why is somebody going to risk their career on
Mm.
something that's undercapitalized, that has founders behind it? So it's still going to be highly selective. There's still going to be lots of failures, but the disruptors are still going to come from the outside, mostly because large companies have a very difficult time continuing to keep the pace of innovation going, because it's at constant odds with taking care of the existing products and services they have,
Mm.
delivering on what they have today. So I think that'll be an ongoing struggle, but I don't ever see it being a situation where the large players are going to completely dominate. There'll still be this disruption happening
Yeah,
from startups.
yeah, I totally agree. And but you got to pick you got to
Got
pick
to
the
pick
right
your
business
spots.
model, yeah, to do
Yep.
that well. And also, using AI to scale, like we've talked about, is the leverage that AI brings is just enormous. So, look, for example, I've come across a book in reading. I've got my Chat GPT app on my phone. I'm going, uh, provide a summary of the book, including major points and ideas for this book. And I'm going, wow. So I love slow reading, but also love quick synopsis. It's like, it's really, really cool. And um, so the other thing I'm intrigued by in terms of the leverage side, which is where I was going, is Mustafa Suleiman, who's just had his company, I think Inflection or whatever, is bought. Well, not sort of, it's not really bought by Microsoft. So Mustafa sold, DeepMind to Google, what, for 800 million, about 2016, I think it was something around that time. It was interesting, his comment about he sees a future where you're going to have businesses which AI is going to be able to do everything from ideation right through to operations. And I certainly see a future potentially where a company of 2 or 3 people might be turning over, $400 or $500 million. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that leverage. And there are models that are certainly quite templated, such as Amazon FBA, fulfillment by Amazon, which does all the heavy lifting in the back end, from basically providing a website for people right through to actually delivering it for them, logistics. I've been interested in your thoughts on that sort of leverage for what sort of style companies we're going to see in the future.
I think you're going to see that across multiple sectors. Anything that is what we call professional service or white collar type of work, that where you don't have to turn wrenches or work with electricity or work with plumbing, I think there's a high probability the degree of automation is going to be significant to where you can have very large businesses that are highly automated, all the way from if you think about customer journey, from customer engagement with AI humans that are very, like talking to you and me. I think we're going to get to the point where it's conversational, unscripted. It's going to be very comfortable for people to go to a kiosk or to be online talking to someone, and they're not going to necessarily know that it's a bot. We've seen some of that stuff demonstrated. And so I think that customer journey, all the way back to back-end fulfillment, logistics, I think much of that will be automated. And to your point, who knows how big a company you'll be able to grow with a limited number of people. We were taken back by the Privacy Hawk example. They've got a high degree of AI in what they're doing in their stuff. And again, to go from 2 million to 20 million, and to go from 10 staff to 15, and when they go from 20 to 200, maybe they'll be at 25 people. So to your point, it doesn't require legions of people to build a sizable company anymore. And I think we're going to see more and more. Now, the question is, what's everybody else going to do? So I think part of it is those societal issues with, what are you going to do? And if AI is handling all the stuff that we've typically had people doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating because, and then it opens a lot of opportunity up for either people to start a side hustle, actually grow a sizable business quite quickly, because they don't have to recreate the infrastructure.
Yep. It's been democratized for sure.
Yeah. And, I came across, did a great interview with a guy called Jeremy Parker, who had his business acquired by Custom Inc., which is basically about, swags, swag.com, which essentially sells, swag gear for promotions, right? So promotional. And what he's done is really fascinating. The fact that he's actually, instead of the hand-to-hand combat of selling, there's 23,000 companies that do promotional products, I think, in the USA. He's basically written software to do all of that. And now they're actually white labeling it under Custom Inc. as a separate division. So anyone could actually become promotional products, and they will look after everything, including the products themselves.
Amazing.
Yeah. And you talk about leverage of capital. When he talked about it, well, not only we've done this, now we're actually going to white label it. So, Amar can sell to a local school and we do everything for you in the back end using their technology from, I went, wow, very cool.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. We saw some of what was possible. There was a company called Aptigee, and it was an educational technology company. And they did something in a sector which is very hard to do. They were selling into school districts all across the US. And it was essentially a platform for unified communications and marketing, such that through multiple channels, whether it's social or conventional, a superintendent or coach or teacher could send the message out through this platform, and it would go out in multiple different ways. Now, that was interesting and not necessarily revolutionary in the way they did it. But what was revolutionary was they took the template that Aaron Ross talks about in Predictable Revenue, his book about how to have sales development reps and closers and BDRs and all the touch points. And they automated that in a way that they could push personalized videos to that contact, that lead, that qualified lead, that would be like they were talking right to that person based on having a de minimis amount of information on the front end. And that made a huge difference. The efficiency associated with their customer acquisition was so good that they were able to do something in a difficult vertical that not a lot of people could do. And
Right.
again, it was because of automation of that sales process in a way that hadn't been done before.
Yeah. And so a lot of companies are becoming what was, just really heavy work, time consuming. The technology, and it doesn't have to be AI. It's
Right.
technology that does it for you and automates almost the entire process. It's really, and I never cease to be amazed at the creativity of entrepreneurs that see a problem and then create an answer to it that scales what they've learnt. And I continue to be amazed.
It's incredible. It's an incredible time to be alive for sure. And things are, sometimes you feel like things are accelerating at an accelerating rate. You think back to the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and somebody said famously, software is eating the world. I think automation and AI in general really is doing that. And the question is, do we need to put brakes on some of that, or is it all going to be, positive and good?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm intrigued by too is the guardrails are being put in place with AI that we should have put in place 10 years ago with social media.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. No doubt.
And I think
100%.
it's lessons from social media, that I think have enabled us to see with a little clearer vision and eyes the issues that AI could potentially bring.
Sure.
Because there's always going to be good actors and bad actors, no matter. This is humanity we're dealing with.
Exactly. Well, and getting to that base truth, they say oftentimes you can't have your own facts, right? Although I think people would debate that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and to some extent, and we've seen some examples of that. I think the AI that's going to win ultimately is that's going to take a neutral position on so many things. In other words, they're not going to build bias in on either way, whichever way you think the bias should go. Because when they do, it tends to give you answers which are kind of appalling. And I think Google was a victim to that with some of the stuff they did with Gemini. It's like things that are statements of historical fact, and you're using Gemini for a research tool, and it comes back with stuff where you're like, well, there's no way that any of that could have been possible. And so it's, I think you got to maintain the human scrutiny on that and just a good common sense point of view in injecting some of those values.
Well, the funny thing about common sense generally quite often is it's not that common.
It's what Benjamin Franklin said, right? It's the least common of all, no doubt. No doubt about it.
Yeah, we can be very intelligent, but sometimes we need to actually apply wisdom, which quite often generally comes with experience and years rather than comes out of the box.
Yeah, time on earth means something, and I'm at a point in my life where I realized that some of the really stupid, self-absorbed things I did early on,
Yeah.
you really only learn not to do them by a little more time on earth.
Yeah. So just before we wrap it up, I'm going to ask you a question too, which is about what brings you real deep joy every day, and what would you do for free if you had all the money in the world? What would you do for free every day? I'm intrigued by that answer. So that's going to be my last question to wrap it up, but I'm just sort of setting the stage for you to maybe think about that a little bit. What are some of the top tips? You've seen a lot of startups come through. You've seen, I suppose, a lot of success and a lot of failure come through your doors. What are some of the top tips for people that want to do a startup, want to start the journey of an entrepreneur? What would some of the things, tips that you could share with our audience?
I would say one is sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And what I mean by that is make sure you're solving a problem that your intended customer really cares about.
Mm-hmm.
All too often, startups fall in love with their own idea. They fail to be a consultant to their own idea. Mm-hmm. They fail to be objective with what the market is really telling them. They tend to build confirmation bias into the kind of questions they ask to get reinforcement, or they talk to friends and family. So one bit of advice we give all of them is go into the approach with the concept that you're going to try to kill this idea that you've fallen in love with, and you'll be better for that. And so using tools like lean canvas methodology, and good qualitative inquiry, what is called customer discovery, by asking good open-ended questions. That's a major tip. And I'd say the other thing is, if you can follow the market in that way, you can get to the point where you might be onto something. If you really listen to what the market's telling you, it's very difficult to do anything by yourself. So the very next step in some of that is figure out how to surround yourself with the kind of team that's going to have the sort of culture and capability that complements what you're good at. Most entrepreneurs are not good at everything. We tend to be good at external stuff, at vision, at sales. We tend to not be necessarily great at details.
Yes.
So be honest about what are those other things that have to happen in order for this to be successful. And then be coachable, be coachable. Don't be hard-headed. And I balance that by coachable, but don't be like a turnstile. Sometimes people will get mentor whiplash where they'll talk to 20 smart people and they're just spinning around trying to pick a direction. Your job as a good founder is to take all that data in from those, good sources and that wisdom, and then synthesize the truth that's going to be best for you. And the best founders I've ever had any experience with of any age are the ones that do that exceedingly well. They take a bunch of inputs, they think about it, and if they're really good, they'll come back to you and say, hey, I listened to what you said. I also talked to these other groups. This is the direction I'm going to set, and here's why. So I think coachability with a good founder filter, a good filter from the information you get, is important as well. And those are kind of the key things to at least getting started. It makes a difference.
I think that has a lot of wisdom, and that's come from years, hasn't it, Jeff?
Yes. And it's come from, being a self-absorbed young person that was highly confident and assumed I could figure it all out. And in retrospect, you can't. Yeah. You need help, and you need to be objective about what the data is really telling you.
And that's the paradox between the beginner's mind and experience, isn't it?
It is, for sure. For sure, 100%.
The beginner doesn't know that it can't be done because no one's done it before, but they do it quite often, and sometimes they don't. On the other hand, sometimes you've got to be careful where you tread. So this is the paradox, isn't it? Which is life itself.
That's true.
So, Jeff, this is the final question: is what would you do for free if you had all the money in the world? What would you do that brings you deep joy?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I would keep doing exactly what I'm doing today. This was a 35-year journey that had lots of different aspects to it: military and large company and university and working in startups. And I think the calling, what I have now is kind of a calling. It's a spiritual calling where if you've got the heart of an educator, a mentor, a coach, seeing other people succeed and helping them go down a path that you tried to go down or did go down yourself, and watching them succeed brings me the most joy. That's what brings me energy. And I've set the business up today to where I can do the mentoring and the coaching and the guiding and the advising, and that brings me real joy. That's why I still teach at the University of Arkansas, is working with the students, working with the entrepreneurs. That's great. And I hope to be able to do that until they flatline me, right? I don't ever really want to quit working, because the last 15 years have been so enjoyable. It hasn't been a grind. It's been a real joy to watch the ecosystem grow, to watch great companies to be built, and to see the kind of successes that some of these entrepreneurs have. And the greatest reward is not the fact that, well, maybe I had an equity interest or maybe I invested. It's just to see them do great things and realize that maybe you were a small part of that along the way.
So that's fantastic. And so you are a leader that really is doing what good leaders should do, and that is to serve. And that's what you obviously are doing, and obviously you're making a difference, and that brings you deep joy. And thank you for sharing that.
Well, thanks again for having me on, and I really enjoyed the conversation. We'll have to do it again sometime.
I look forward to it, Jeff. And maybe somewhere in America.
That'd be great. Next time you're here, if you can figure out how to stop the plane between New York and LA, we're right in the middle. Come by and see us.
Yeah, so I am flying over you in the next 24 hours. But I'll wave as I go overhead.
That sounds great. Thanks, Jeff.
It's been an absolute joy.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for having me.